Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into a story today, a story that's often been simplified, boiled down to just a label, mad. But we're doing a deep dive into Joanna of Castile to see if there's more to it. Was she really mentally unstable? Or was there something else going on?
Well, you hit the nail on the head there, right? Like, how much of what we know about historical figures is actually just, shaped by the people who had the power to write the story? It makes you think.
Exactly. And we've got a lot to unpack. Biographies, analyses of power dynamics,
Yeah.
how people viewed Joanna back then.
Oh, yeah, perceptions are everything, aren't they?
Absolutely. So, first things first, Joanna, born 1479, daughter of, you probably know them, Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain. Talk about a royal upbringing.
Privilege, education, the whole 9 yards, but
But not always a smooth ride, right?
not at all, no. Her life takes some crazy turns. Siblings, nephew, all dying off. Suddenly, she's the heir to Castile. A lot of pressure, I'd imagine.
And then, of course, there's the marriage. Philip the Handsome of Burgundy. Now, that's a name that sparks some stories, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah. Passionate, powerful, depends who you ask. Some say it was a love story. Others say, well, a whole lot of drama.
Sounds like a soap opera waiting to happen, honestly.
It kind of was, but think about the clash of cultures, too. You've got Joanna straddling two worlds. The Spanish court, super strict, pious, all about tradition.
Yeah.
Then you've got the Burgundian court, much more cosmopolitan, looser.
Like night and day, almost.
Exactly. And that's key to how people saw Joanna. What might fly in Burgundy could raise eyebrows back in Spain, right? And that fuels the rumors about her mental state.
Wow. So it's not just about her actions, but where those actions were happening, what was expected of her in each place.
Exactly. And don't forget the people around her, Spanish nobles, they weren't keen on losing their power. Calling her mad was a convenient way to push her
It
aside.
makes you wonder how much of her story was actually about being a woman in power, a threat to the status quo.
Oh, 100%. So we've got a woman, huge responsibility, tangled up in politics. And then tragedy hits. 1506, Philip dies suddenly.
That must have been devastating.
It was, and very public. Her grief, well, to us, it seemed natural, but back then, it was used against her. Another piece of the unfit to rule puzzle.
It's almost cruel, using her grief to manipulate the situation.
And that's when her own father, Ferdinand, steps in, declares her unfit, basically imprisons her, power grab disguised as concern. And poor Joanna's stuck in Tordesillas for, get this, almost 50 years. A queen, but also a captive.
50 years. I can't even imagine. Did she just, accept it?
Nope, not at all. Even locked away, she held onto her identity as queen, refused to sign anything that lessened her authority. Shows you she understood power, wanted to keep it. Really fascinating.
So then why not fight harder, for her freedom?
That's where it gets even more interesting. We're talking early 1500s, right? Women's options were limited, even queens. The system was rigged against her. Even those acts of rebellion, the things they called madness, maybe that was her way of fighting back, in the only way she could.
Like trying to play the game even though the rules were stacked against her.
Powerful way to put it. See, Joanna's story isn't just about mental health. It's about power, gender, how history itself gets manipulated by those in charge.
Okay, so we've set the scene. Joanna, born into power, caught in a web of politics, labeled mad and confined. What I'm curious about now is, were there specific things she did that were seen as mad? Can we untangle the truth from the political spin?
And that's exactly where we're headed next. Looking at the evidence, trying to understand it all in context, and maybe, just maybe, seeing Joanna in a whole new light.
I can't wait. It's amazing how one word, mad, can completely change how we see a person, how we understand history itself. So we've painted a pretty bleak picture so far. Mad queen, confined for decades. But did Joanna ever, actually rule? Was she effective at all?
You bet. Despite all the pressure, the madness rumors swirling around, there were times she was a pretty capable ruler, yeah.
Oh, really? Like what specifically?
Diplomacy, for one. After Philip died, she had to deal with all those alliances, rivalries, especially between the Spanish and Burgundian nobles. And she managed it pretty skillfully.
So she wasn't just a pawn, she was making moves herself.
Exactly. There are also records showing she cared about justice. She intervened in disputes, made sure even the vulnerable had a voice.
Wow. Sense of duty, compassion for her people. Yeah, it's hard to square that with the mad queen image.
It really is, isn't it? Shows how a label can totally warp our understanding of someone.
Okay, speaking of complicated, let's talk about her son, Charles V. He becomes Holy Roman Emperor, inherits this huge empire, partly because of Joanna's claim to the throne. Quite a legacy, huh? But their relationship, I'm guessing it wasn't all sunshine and roses.
Not exactly, no. It was complex, affection, but tension, too. Charles grew up in Burgundy, far from his mom. When he came to Spain to claim his inheritance, well, sparks were bound to fly.
And let's not forget, Charles benefited from Joanna being seen as mad. It made his claim stronger, let him rule instead of her.
Right. As much as he might have cared for her personally, he was also a politician. Keeping that unstable narrative alive helped him hold on to power.
So she's sidelined by her own son, the one person who should have been on her side. It's kind of tragic, isn't it?
It really is. It shows how ruthless power can be, even within a family.
I wonder what she thought, seeing him rise while she was stuck in Tordesillas.
Must have been a roller coaster of emotions. But even in her later years, there are stories of her asserting her authority, demanding the respect due a queen.
Like she was clinging to that last shred of power, to her identity, to keep her sanity, maybe.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It shows incredible strength. Despite everything, she never gave up who she was, that claim to the throne.
Okay, we've talked about the events, the politics, the relationships, but what about her legacy? Joanna may have been pushed aside in her own time, but her story still fascinates people, Historians, artists, writers, they keep coming back to her. Why do you think that is?
It's a story that's both timeless and super relevant, you know what I mean? Ambition, betrayal, love, loss, the fight for power, it's all there. But it also gives us a glimpse into a specific moment in history, this huge time of change in Europe.
She was caught between the medieval world and the Renaissance, right? Between old ideas about women and, well, these new glimmers of female agency emerging. No wonder it resonates.
Exactly. Plus, there's the whole mystery of her mental state. Was she mad or not? It keeps people debating. Her story makes us question what we think we know about sanity, power, and women in history.
It makes us look beyond the label and see her as a person.
Yeah.
Right? A woman dealing with unbelievable circumstances, but still showing strength, vulnerability, determination.
Couldn't have said it better myself. In a way, her legacy is about reclaiming her story, seeing her not as just the mad queen, but as a complex, intelligent individual who never truly surrendered.
So it's about challenging the historical narrative, not just a victim, but someone actively trying to shape her own destiny in a system that was against her.
Exactly. And it's a legacy that's still relevant today, don't you think? It reminds us to question what we're told, to look for different perspectives, and to see the strength in people history has tried to erase.
It's kind of inspiring. Even though she didn't win her fight for power, her story says, never give up. Keep fighting for what you believe in, no matter how hard it gets.
Couldn't agree more. It's about resilience in the face of, well, everything life throws at you.
Speaking of resilience, let's talk about how Joanna's story has been told in art, literature, pop culture. It's fascinating how her image has changed over time, reflecting how we think about women and mental health.
Absolutely. It seems every generation finds something in her story that speaks to them, their anxieties, their understanding of the world.
Like her story is a mirror, showing us how our own culture has changed.
Exactly. Early on, she was often shown as this tragic figure, a victim of her own emotions, manipulated by powerful men. The classic mad queen, sometimes romanticized, sometimes used to scare people.
Which, of course, just plays into that old idea that women are fragile, that they can't handle power.
Yep. But as ideas about women and mental health have shifted, so have the portrayals of Joanna. We see more nuanced versions now, ones that recognize her intelligence, her strength, how she fought back against those who tried to control her.
So not just a passive victim anymore, but someone who tried to take charge of her own life, even when it seemed impossible.
Exactly. And this shift isn't just in the images, but in the themes, too. We see more focus on the politics, the power dynamics, how being a woman played a role in her downfall.
It's amazing how art and literature can show us these bigger societal changes, give us new ways to understand historical figures. It's a good reminder that history isn't set in stone. It keeps evolving as we learn more, see things differently.
Couldn't have said it better. Which brings us to a really interesting question. How is Joanna remembered in Spain itself, the country she was supposed to rule? Is she still seen as the Mad Queen, or has her image changed there, too?
That's a great question. It makes you think about how a country deals with its own past,
Well, in Spain, it's kind of a mixed bag. She's still often called Juana la Loca, but there's a growing movement to re-examine her story, to understand all the complexities of her life.
So there's a kind of tension between that old view and a newer, more nuanced understanding of who she was.
Yeah, and it shows up in how she's remembered, statues, memorials, but also debates about how to represent her. Some people want a more sympathetic portrayal, focusing on her strength, her resilience. Others feel it's important to acknowledge the harder parts of her life, the mental health challenges she might have faced.
Sounds like a good debate to have, honestly. It shows people are willing to grapple with history's complexities, to see historical figures as real people, not just characters in a simple story.
I agree. And it's not just a debate in Spain. Her story connects with people everywhere because it touches on these universal themes: power, gender, the human desire for control. It makes us look at uncomfortable truths about how societies treat those who are different, those who challenge the system.
It also raises questions about mental health, right?
Mm.
Especially for people in power. How differently would things have gone if she'd had support instead of being condemned and locked away?
Absolutely. It shows how important empathy is in leadership and how dangerous it is to use mental health as a weapon to discredit someone.
Well, we've covered a lot today, from Joanna's upbringing and that intense marriage to the political schemes that led to her confinement, and of course the whole debate about her mental state.
We've looked at her legacy, how she's shown in art and literature, how she's remembered in Spain and beyond. But before we wrap up, there's one more piece of Joanna's story I think we need to talk about.
Oh, I'm intrigued.
Well,
What is he? You were saying there's one more piece of Joanna's story we should cover before we wrap up. I'm curious to hear what it is.
it's her faith.
Hmm.
Her religion, she was deeply devout, and that's something we haven't really touched on yet.
That's true. But it makes sense. I mean, she grew up in a Spain where Catholicism was everything, especially under her parents, Ferdinand and Isabella.
Exactly. They were all about it. The Reconquista, expelling Jews and Muslims. Joanna's upbringing must have been steeped in religion.
Right, so that intense faith, it stayed with her.
Oh, yeah. Especially during those years at Tordesillas. Seems like she found comfort in her religious practices.
That's interesting, though, because sometimes those same practices were used as proof of her madness, right?
Right, and that's why context is so important. What might seem extreme to us now, back then it could have been perfectly normal.
So outward displays of religious devotion, they weren't automatically a red flag back then.
Nope. Think about it. This was a time when people believed in miracles, visions, intense religious feeling that was often seen as a good thing, a sign of piety.
Okay, so what kinds of things did Joanna actually do? What might have seemed strange later on?
Intense prayer rituals, devotion to certain saints, fascination with relics. There are even stories about her having visions, mystical experiences.
And those were seen as evidence of instability rather than genuine religious experience.
Yeah, looking back, it's easy to misinterpret those actions. But we have to remember, religion was woven into daily life back then. Dismissing her faith as madness ignores how important it was to people in that era.
It's like we're imposing our 21st century psychology on someone who lived in a totally different world.
Exactly. Instead of seeing her faith as something to be skeptical of or something that was wrong with her, what if it was actually a source of comfort, a way to cope with everything she was going through?
Yeah, like her anchor in the storm. Actually, that's a pretty powerful image.
It is. It shows how resilient people can be, how faith can sustain you even when times are tough. It reminds us that even those labeled mad can find meaning and purpose.
Well, here we are at the end of our deep dive. It's been quite a journey. Joanna of Castile, queen, prisoner, enigma. We've looked at the history, the power struggles, the madness, accusations, all those mysteries that still surround her.
And along the way, I think we've learned something about history itself. It's rarely black and white, isn't it? Human lives are complicated.
Absolutely. Her story challenges those simple narratives we try to impose on the past, makes us question our assumptions, dig deeper, see the nuances. We may never know for sure if she was truly mad or just a victim of circumstance, of people using her, but maybe that's okay.
Maybe the lesson is that history isn't about finding the one right answer. It's about keeping the conversation going, asking questions, seeing different sides, recognizing that people in the past were just as human as we are.
Well said. Joanna's story reminds us that labels can be misleading. They can hide more than they reveal. Her legacy is a challenge to look beyond those labels, to dig deeper, to embrace the messiness of history.
And to remember that the past isn't some dead thing. It's still shaping our world today.
We hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the world of Joanna of Castile. There's so much more to learn about her, about that time period.
So keep asking questions, keep exploring. History is full of surprises.
Until next time.